Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 4:02. Council, any additions or deletions to today's agenda? Councillor Nelson.
I just had a question for in-camera number 1. Is it a agenda item strictly for information or potentially something for action or determining next steps?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. CEO Olson.
At this time, it is an information item. It's a verbal update.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, any additions or deletions? Administration?
None.
And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Council minutes for adoption. Council, any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Wass.
If I can get all this out. I move that we adopt special meeting of council minutes for July 9th, 2020, special in-camera meeting of council minutes, July 14th, 2020, regular meeting of council minutes, July 14th, 2020, standing committee meeting of council minutes, July 21st, 2020, and special meeting of council minutes, July 21st, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions? Councillor Nelson.
Could I request to split? There's just one that I have a bunch of questions about and like handle it separately, so likely be tabled, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Did you want to split one from the 5?
Well, yeah, it's the July 14th special meeting. In-camera special meeting is what the header is.
July special in-camera meeting, Council, July 14th, correct?
Yes, pages 4 and 5.
Okay, so Ms. Anderson, if we can split the motion to exclude the second minutes.
Yeah.
And Council, we have a motion on the first 4 to approve from Councillor Waugh. Council, any questions regarding the 4? Seeing none, I'll call to question all those in favor. Those are passed unanimously. And we have another motion to approve the special in-camera meeting of council minutes of July 14th. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, if I could speak to it. I wasn't at the meeting and it wasn't recorded because it's in camera, but the title is in-camera special meeting, but then we called to order an in-camera regular meeting. And then we went in camera with a standing committee meeting, out of camera, standing committee, and then adjourned a regular meeting. So there's kind of 3 different meeting types in one set of minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Administration, any comments on that as we are looking at that?
We would have to take a look and revisit that. There are 3 different meeting typos in that and would need to be amended.
Councillor Nelson.
Could I make a motion to postpone until the next regular council meeting? Minutes for in-camera special meeting July 14th.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. We have a motion to postpone. Council, any debate or questions? And just seeing none, I'll call to question all those in favor. That's passed unanimously. Thank you for that, Councillor Nelson. And that brings us to our citizens minute with Council. Ms. Anderson.
Nobody registered.
And seeing none, that'll bring us to our action items for this evening. We have 3. The first one, FCSS service area reduction and restructure. CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This item is before council tonight after months of work through FCSS strategic planning process, as well as through the 2020 budget process. I'll give a high-level overview of some of the areas within the report and then invite Ms. Bouchard, our FCSS manager, to highlight some further areas for council and the public's benefit. FCSS management began to review their their service delivery model, in November of 2019 through a strategic planning process that sought to find internal efficiencies and improve service delivery, as well as to manage with the pending elimination of Parent Link. Later into 2020, through the budget process for this year, a $75,000 reduction was identified by council and options were discussed in camera as they related to positions and contracts to achieve the permanent reduction over the last few months between Hinton and council. During this time, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Some additional learning opportunities were presented through temporary suspension of services, and this included the Freedom Express service, which was put on hold. This had already experienced a reduction in demand for hours in months previous and resulted in a reduction in those hours before going on hiatus through the pandemic. The result was a proposal of a consolidation of the core FCSS team, as outlined on page 20 of the agenda package, which streamlined roles and ensured alignment with the FCSS pillars, provincial preventative mandates, and the well-being and resiliency framework. Furthermore, through an openness to explore some creative solutions to achieve that overall budget reduction, our FCSS team approached the Evergreens Foundation to determine whether there was interest and capacity in their operations to transfer the service there. After much discussion and work between Ms. Bouchard and Ms. Chambers from the foundation, an agreement was developed that ensures the consistent service delivery of a Freedom Express type model delivered by a trusted local agency. The recommended action for this item tonight is that the town of Hinton enter into an agreement with the Evergreens Foundation as presented to provide an annual financial contribution toward the foundation's accessible transportation service for residents with mobility limitations based on the Freedom Express model and eliminate the town provided Freedom Express transportation service area. Ms. Bouchard, I'll turn it over to you to take us through any areas that you wish to highlight. Ms. Alchargi, FCSS Assistant Manager, is on the line as well. And Ms. Howard sends her regrets to be here in person, but she is available through phone with Ms. Bouchard as well. So at this time, if there's anything you'd like to highlight, go ahead.
Good evening, Council. As CAO Olson has explained, we are presenting this public report following the July 14th, 2020 Standing Committee meeting, where committee recommended that the town enter into an agreement with the Evergreens Foundation as presented in camera. This direction was following a previous in-camera report brought to Council at the June 9, 2020 Standing Committee meeting, which outlined options for budget reductions and an FCSS services review. This process was initiated as a result of the 2020 budget process, where Council determined that the Family and Community Support Services Department could support an overall departmental budget reduction of $75,000 in 2020 and in future years in order to achieve the desired tax rates for the town's 3-year operating budget. As such, administration undertook an extensive review of FCSS services and identified opportunities to transfer, consolidate, and revamp services within the FCSS department. The resulting recommendations, as reviewed by Council in camera in June and July, entail 3 components and will, if supported by Council, will support an overall departmental budget reduction of $75,000 in 2020 and in future years. The first component is the transfer of Freedom Express services to an external agency. The transfer of Freedom Express services was identified as a key cost-reducing measure and as such was an essential first step to initiate the service review process. Administration's recommendation to transfer accessible transportation services from a town-provided service to a service provided by an external agency was identified following extensive analysis of the service area. The reasoning for this decision is related to the identification of a strong opportunity with an established community agency, duplication of a similar service, low ridership of the town's Freedom Express service and minimal recent demand, and alignment with the transit mission statement as adopted by Council in 2018. Administration had conversations with agencies in the community and identified the Evergreens Foundation as a community agency interested in taking over the delivery of this service, as they are equipped with the service expertise and busing equipment to most easily assume this transfer of service. In order to ensure a high quality of service continues to be available to residents once the service is transferred, an agreement was established to outline terms, expectations, requirements as appended to this report. This service would be based on the Freedom Express service model currently provided by the town, including similar rates, eligibility criteria, and hours of operation. Some key stipulations of the agreement would be services remain accessible and available to residents who currently rely on it. Funding provided by the town to the Evergreens Foundation for this service is limited to a maximum of $25,000 per year based on service expectations being met. And services continue to be offered under a similar service delivery model with affordable ridership prices for users and a minimum number of service hours per week to align with the services currently offered by the town. Town administration and the Evergreens Foundation administration worked collaboratively to develop this proposed agreement wherein the town would provide a financial contribution of $25,000 per year to enable the Evergreens Foundation to assume the delivery of accessible door-to-door transportation for residents with unique mobility limitations that cannot be accommodated by the public transit system. The agreement was reviewed by the Evergreens Foundation's board on 3 occasions. The first motion was carried on June 25th, 2020 to direct this Chief Administrative Officer, Kristen Chambers, to initiate discussions on the partnership agreement. A second motion on July 13th, 2020 was carried that authorized their administration to proceed with the matter as per the terms discussed in closed session. And the third motion carried on August 6, 2020, approved the Chief Administrative Officer, Board Chair, and the Town of Hinton to sign the partnership agreement as presented. The approval of the agreement with the Evergreens Foundation will initiate administration's overall restructure of the FCSS department as the necessary funds will be made available to support the budget reduction of $75,000 to adjust the FCSS team to 3 full-time positions and to develop the Hinton Family Resource Center, the second and third components of the cost-reducing restructure. The second component of the restructure, FCSS staffing restructure, has been designed to optimally meet community needs. The FCSS team has collectively undergone an extensive strategic planning process since fall of 2019 to find internal efficiencies, improve service delivery to the community, and review the service delivery model. Through this strategic planning process, administration identified the opportunity to streamline the core FCSS team, currently consisting of 4 positions, to 3 positions. This model uses opportunities to find efficiencies and improve service delivery. This shift would result in the prevention of elder abuse position being eliminated with some key prevention programming and services carried over to the new positions. Programs that have community duplication that could be shifted to other agencies or that are no longer significantly benefiting the community have been eliminated. FCSS will continue to provide referral supports in these areas as community collaboration and referral is a part of the core FCSS mandate. Community connections, early childhood, and family events have been added to staff roles to support the development of a Hinton Family Resource Center and fill community gaps. More information is provided on this additional service area below. This staffing restructure requires slight additional costs to accommodate the additional benefits and unionized wage costs of 1 new full-time employee versus 2 part-time. The additional costs of $11,989 result from the following factors: additional benefit costs of full-time versus part-time employees, a change in wages due to the unionized pay grid, and costs associated with the program launch of the Hinton Family Resource Center. With the elimination of provincial funding and the closure of Parent Link in March 2020, there has been a significant community gap identified in the area of services for young families. The development of the Hinton Family Center is being proposed to address this need as a third component of the FCSS restructure. FCSS did receive a small grant from the province to provide caregiver education in April of 2020. While the Caregiver Education Coordinator offers meaningful services to Hinton families, the funds to support this part-time position can only be allocated towards parent education and focuses on all age groups. There remains a large gap in the community for supporting young families in a more interactive and play-based developmental model. These preventative, universal, learning, and play-based services are the foundation in helping young families grow, learn, spend quality time together, and build strong, healthy family relationships that also become the foundation of strong, healthy communities. As such, administration identified the reintroduction of services for young families as a key priority within FCSS mandate of providing preventative social supports to the community. The three roles of FCSS coordinator, community connection, the FCSS coordinator, family life, and the caregiver education coordinator will collaboratively provide these services to ensure families have access to the engagement opportunities, relationship building activities, and educational resources that will enhance comprehensive family support. Overall, the transfer of accessible transportation services and the elimination of the Freedom Express service area will result in significant cost savings that will be used to achieve the approved budget reductions, support the restructure of the core FCSS team from 4 positions to 3 positions, and launch the Hinton Family Resource Center. These restructure components will support the development of responsive, effective, and comprehensive supports for Hinton residents. These changes are designed to ensure valuable programs and services continue to be offered in the community within the taxation resources available. The service area reduction and department restructure achieve cost reductions, build community collaborations, and rebuild essential FCSS services. Council's approval of the transfer of accessible transportation services agreement and subsequent removal of the Freedom Express service area from the FCSS department will enable individuals, families, and the community to continue to benefit from the many other FCSS programs and services that fulfill the FCSS mandate. In conclusion, based on the information shared this evening, administration is recommending that the town of Hinton enter into an agreement with the Evergreens Foundation as presented to provide an annual financial contribution towards the foundation's accessible transportation service for residents with mobility limitations based on the Freedom Express model and eliminate the town provided Freedom Express transportation service area. Thank you, and we welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bouchard and CEO Olson. Council, any questions, directions, comments? Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have just one question, but first I want to just say, we've had these conversations a little bit, and I've stated it in our in-camera discussions, but this is I guess, a good way of looking at potentially a $75,000 decrease in budget, but looked at it as an opportunity to find the efficiencies in the organization, plus a unique way of how to continue a service to our community and use community partnerships. So I'm very happy and pleased to see that. I just want to have one question in regards, just a clarification to make sure residents are aware. But the Freedom Express, we're looking at Freedom Express basically staying the same as is, with it's transferring over to the Evergreens Foundation. Potentially also there is once it transfers over, if that's the will of council, then it could expand potentially. It has room to grow if Evergreens find that necessary, correct?
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. I'll defer to Ms. Bouchard, as she had worked with Ms. Chambers on the agreement and understands their capacity to expand or not.
Yes, within the agreement, the minimum requirements are the 21 hours of service that the service has to run. That is just the minimum service within that agreement. They absolutely can go above and beyond from that.
Yeah, so I just, if I may, is to be clear that the service continues the way it is. And when you get, you see an opportunity with another organization taking over that, who have a different part of the community that they are addressing needs for and things like that, the opportunity may be there that, we were seeing ridership a little bit lower, it could potentially grow into more so if they. So on that note, I'd like to make the motion, if I may, Mr. Mayor, that the town of Hinton enter an agreement with the Evergreens Foundation as presented to provide is that the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, to provide an annual financial contribution towards the foundation's accessible transportation service for residents with mobility limitations limitations based on the Freedom Express model and eliminate the town-provided Freedom Express transportation service area.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the floor, and I have Councillor Race in the queue. Councillor Race.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. And right now, as it is, with us having our transit bus and our Freedom Express, a $70 pass is interchangeable. Is that correct?
Ms. Bouchard.
That is correct, yes.
So will that follow suit when, if Evergreens takes over Freedom Express, that people who now are utilizing a transit pass can use it on the Freedom Express with Evergreens?
Myself and Kristen Chambers haven't went in depth with that conversation, but our preliminary conversations have been that we will go in the direction to make the easiest transition for our residents. So yes, so the passes that have already been purchased, like the monthly passes, we are going in the direction that they would just carry on with the service that the Evergreens would be providing.
And I just have one quick one. So Evergreens will be using their bus. They won't be using our current Freedom Express. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is our bus a leased bus or is it a town-owned vehicle?
The Freedom Express bus is a town-owned bus.
So would, if Evergreen's bus breaks down, would they be utilizing our bus as a standby? You know, so service continues?
That's a good question. Those conversations haven't come up, but again, being a partner with the Evergreens Foundation, that would be a potential option I could see with the Evergreens Foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. This agreement and you know the template it sets for future partnerships to ultimately save money. I don't think very many municipal budgets are going to be able to have redundancies in the community. But the only question I really had is, does this agreement follow any of our purchasing and tendering policies?
C. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I'll defer to Ms. Bouchard on this one. I believe that it was a sole source situation in that there was only really one agency in town that had the capabilities to fulfill a transfer that way, but other elements of the purchasing policy, I'll defer to Ms. Bouchard.
Ms. Bouchard.
So yes, it would be a sole source, but it would not fall within the purchasing policy. And administration did follow best practices as outlined in the procurement policy, ensuring that at least 2 agencies were consulted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, anything further? We have a motion on the floor. I'll speak quickly to it. I'm in support of this. Synergies, economies of scales. This is the future of municipalities, especially our size, and partnering up, whether it's regionalization or working with partners in our community. We keep a service, we save money, and we have, more importantly, an out clause if the service is deemed to not be at our satisfaction. So it covers everything. So I'd like to thank administration for their work, thank the Evergreens Foundation and Kristen Chambers for her work. And I believe today is a good day and we are better positioned from a taxpayer's perspective and a service delivery perspective. So I strongly support this. Council, anything further regarding this motion on the floor? And seeing none, I'll call to question that the town of Hinton enter into an agreement with the Evergreens Foundation as presented to provide an annual financial contribution towards the foundation's accessible transportation service for residents with mobility limitations based on the Freedom Express model and eliminate the town provided Freedom Express transportation service area. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this action? And if not, thank you, Ms. Bouchard, Ms. Altragi, and CEO Olson in administration for that. We'll move to our second item for this evening, amendments to remuneration policy 52. CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Council has reviewed the changes to this policy previously at the July 7th and the July 21st standing committee meetings. Key changes to the version presented tonight include amendments to language in section 4.7 for the mayor to attend the FCM conference annually, to amend the same section to include councillors to attend FCM once in their term, and to amend the policy to include council to continue completing timesheets as per current practice. The recommended action tonight is for council to approve the remuneration policy number 52 as amended. Ms. Way is present tonight to assist in answering any questions that council might have on the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Council, any questions, directions, comments? Not, I'll entertain a motion if that is the will of council. Councilor Waugh.
I would move the council approve remuneration policy number 052 as presented.
Thank you, Councilor Waugh. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate? Councilor Nelson.
Yeah, this is brought up to me by another fellow member of council, but I think there's a bit of confusion in regards to reporting of committee meetings. At the last one, we had spoken about whether it's mandatory and that our payment for those is contingent upon that reporting. But that entire section was removed. And I don't think there was actually any appetite to remove the entire section. It was just the mandatory nature of it. So from the one we saw on the 21st, it was 3.2.1, which is just no longer in the new one at all.
Administration, any comments on that?
I'll defer to Ms. Way.
Ms. Way?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through to Councillor Nelson. Based on the conversation that occurred at the table that night, and then the following direction, I believe that was put on the table by Councillor Stashik, that we return to the filling out of timesheets as the previous practice. So given that that was a new addition, that you guys fill out the reporting and submit that, and that it be included in the information reports, that's the reason that that was removed, and that's the sole reason it was removed. So if that was a misunderstanding on my part, apologies, and that can easily be re-added back in.
Thank you, Ms. Way. Councillor Nelson, anything regarding that?
Yeah, no, it's kind of just recollection based. I haven't had an opportunity to review the videos and stuff. So if other members of council or administration have, based on Councillor Stashik's direction, I felt like it was only specific to the mandatory nature of receiving payment for those committees. So I'll open up to the rest of the council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, any questions, comments? We have a motion on the floor that council approve remuneration policy 52 as presented. Any further debate? Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to move that the remuneration policy be amended to include section 3.2.1 from the July 21st Standing Committee of Council meeting.
Councillor Nelson, I know Ms. Anderson, you're typing that up. Do we have a screenshot or the wording from 3.2.1 that we can put on the board for the entire council and those tuning in?
And if I could as well, it would have to be adjusted slightly because it's submit monthly exception reports. It should just be submit monthly reports. It's on page 20 of 81 of the July 21st agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Would I be able to request that we zoom in slightly if possible?
I'm just trying to.
Yeah, so it's 3.2.1. And if we want to include all the wording in the motion, it would be basically that except without exception, because that was contingent upon administration completing our timesheets.
Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, I'm recalling the conversation, and this is just by memory, but one of the things that was brought up in regards to that is the summary of discussion, decisions of council, appointed committee, board, and meetings. I think, and Councillor Stasha can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was also mentioned that maybe there's discussion that might be happening in some of those meetings that maybe, aren't something that they want publicly known and things of that nature. So it complicates things a little bit in regards to what we're reporting and, getting potentially permission, possibly sending our reports first to council or to the committee that we're on, and if I recall, that was part of the conversation that we had. Because there may be things and discussions of internal things that aren't necessarily wanted to know by the public. So I recall that being, so my understanding of the last meeting was this was not something that was an appetite. It was one, it was complicated on when we were reporting it. Two was getting it into the packages so that we all have it. So I thought, I was under the impression from the last conversation that this was not something that we were proceeding with at this time. Potentially, maybe if there was some things that could be ironed out in some ways and maybe a little more specific as to what it is, but that was my recollection of the conversation that we had the last one. So I think there's just too many questions at this point in regards to doing this. I'm not opposed to having, potentially it, but I think we need to have more conversation before we throw it in here. So that's my thoughts on it. So I wouldn't really be supporting the motion at this current time. So
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. I had a similar recollection. I remember my concern was regarding, could we claim the month later? Let's say somebody's on vacation, they don't get it in by the 8th day. There was no verbiage on saying you can claim that meeting a month later, and there's still some work to be done. Like, I want to support, I think a written report is better than a verbal one. But I remember that's where the conversation died, and I think that's, I would have understood it like Miss Way too, that it was going to be pulled because we kind of left it at a strange state. Without any verbiage regarding how we can claim following the 8th day, I couldn't support it right now. I don't know if we want to have that discussion as a council, but it would take that for me to support it, because as of right now, the way I read it is if you don't claim it on the 8th day, there's nothing that supports that you can claim meetings months later. And it's not a practice we've used, so it's still, I think we're not all the way there yet. Councillor Magoon?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, same concerns. I remember reading over that section, and I had concerns around how prescriptive it was. I think this is an area where you do have to have some flexibility in terms of when meetings are, when you report, and how that aligns up with council. As well, there's the protected discussion issues. If there are true in-camera items happening with your various boards, those should be reported on to the extent that you can deliver it appropriately. And again, that whole 8-day scenario, that's an issue for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, actually kind of a open-ended question, I guess. I wonder if the remuneration isn't contingent upon the reporting. I wonder if our committee policy that we review every October is maybe the better place for expectations around council reporting. And so potentially, I think it makes sense to withdraw this amendment if that would be amenable to council, and then potentially look at in the future bringing something towards our committee policies rather than within remuneration.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. First, I'll just go to council. Any objections with the withdrawal of the amendment, council? And seeing none, that will be withdrawn. Thank you, Councillor Nelson and CEO Olsen.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. That would be achievable by administration to take a look at and ahead of the organizational meeting. And for council's benefit too, to keep in mind that this comes back in the spring of next year prior to the election through the committee to look at the remuneration pieces of that, but we can open up anything that that hasn't been ironed out through a look at that other policy.
Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just want to say I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Nelson's intention there. I think looking at this process through committee reporting is the best avenue. I think that gives us a little bit of time and a chance to process what we want that final product to look like and what works best not only for this council, but for future councils. So I appreciate that idea. Thanks, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have the original motion on the floor without the amendment that council approve remuneration policy 52 as presented. Any further discussions? And seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this action item this evening? Seeing nothing, thank you, administration, Ms. Way, CEO Olsen. That will bring us to our final action item for this evening, subdivision 149, 467 Gregg Avenue. CEO Olsen.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Over the last several months, administration's been working with a local developer on a subdivision application and development agreement regarding the property on Gregg Avenue within the Highway Commercial District. Though progress is made in a number of areas within the development agreement, there are terms within the DA that we were unable to reach agreement on. And through that process, the developer may seek council's consideration on any disputed items. At this time, as municipal practice and supported through the MGA, the town, through the development agreement, requires servicing obligations of the subdivision through installation of services or the posting of securities in the amount of the estimated servicing construction costs. In his letter to council, which is attachment 2 to the report, the developer, Mr. Hall, states that without a project site plan and building plan, sizing and placing the site services on the property may cause additional construction costs once the project's been determined. He also goes on to explain, and he was unable to attend tonight as a delegation, but that servicing the lot can be cost prohibitive at this stage of development, and that the upfront costs are a deterrent to that development. So through this, Mr. Hall has requested council's consideration to defer the servicing of the lot either through construction or posting of securities to the development permit stage. The risk that this presents to the town, and I will invite Mr. Vanna to elaborate afterward on anything that I may have missed through this deferral, is that a change in ownership may occur where that obligation to service the lot would be transferred to new owner or to the town, and it may result in the highway lot being unserviced for a period of time. Administration recognizes that growth and development for the community is a key component for council's strategic plan. The decision to change practice from our governing documents and templates to make this request is outside of administration's authority, and we are seeking council discussion and deliberation on this item tonight. As council may direct to review or change practice in the future, they may meet the request of the developer, or they may hold to current practice. Because of that adherence to our guiding documents, we're seeking some direction from council. Mr. Vanna is present as well if there's anything he'd like to elaborate on, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, my question's for administration. So I've been thinking about this. I don't think I can count the number of times that I've had discussions as council about the whole, deferring costs to building stage as opposed to permitting stage. So one of the things I was thinking about when I read the report was the risk to the town as it involves a transfer of property. What happens if, the piece of property is sold and then that cost is sort of shifted, or it makes the property more difficult to sell? So I guess my question was, is it possible to register a lien against the property as by agreement of the developer and the town, where they essentially they would agree to pay for the costs of development if they decide to sell the property later down the line? Does that make sense?
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll invite Mr. Vanna to, if he has experience with that or knowledge of any other community that has entertained that.
Mr. Vanna.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Good evening, council. The only legal mechanism the town has to ensure that lands get serviced appropriately are the development agreement. The only two times that the town can actually enter into a development agreement are at time of subdivision, which is this time, or at the time of development permit. And the obligations run with the developer that is developing the property. We're not permitted to register a lien against the property, as we're not the ones doing the development, and we don't have that ability under the Act or under land titles. As one of the problems that this faces is the fact that if under the Act, this is the time when we enter into the development agreement and we require those services to be serviced, the property to be serviced. We have a number of properties in town already that, as we try and expand our economic development efforts and bring business to town, one of the problems we've run into already is that we've had lands that are not serviced properly. And when people inquire about those and we tell them how much it costs to service it, or that they're responsible for servicing it, then the deals fall through. And that's one of the practical reasons as to why you would require a property to be serviced at the time of subdivision. But the other reason from a more legal perspective is the fact that it's the obligation of the developer who is developing that lot to service it. Once he could sell it, if it were subdivided tomorrow and allowed to be registered, he could sell the property tomorrow, in which case then we're chasing after who to service it to. Even though we can put the agreement on title, it then becomes difficult for us to then try and enforce something where he's no longer the owner of the property per se. And I've experienced that, and I've actually gone through the court mechanisms to try and deal with developers on that basis in other communities.
Thank you, Mr. Vanna. Before I go to Councillor Hawes, I had a follow-up somewhat on that. I'm trying to understand the risk from a town's perspective on getting the securities at the development agreement stage, or putting in the development agreement that they are deferred to the development permit stage, and the development permit would not be issued unless securities are paid. So I'm confused that if the developer won't develop without these conditions, I struggle in seeing the difference in risk by just deferring it to the stage later. And the example I'll use, and it's fairly common, is developers work with people who come in and want to lease the area for 15, 20 years, build a gas station, a store, and without a development agreement in place, many people who look to develop a business will say, well, I'll go somewhere else because you still have some hoops to go through. So again, could we get clarification on the level of risk difference on deferring it one stage later with caveats in the DA to make sure that we do get the servicing done before the development permit is issued? And that's where I continuously struggle. And my example is the city of Brooks. I spoke to AUMA president as his role as mayor of the city of Brooks, and they've implemented this as standard practice. But you're right, most communities in Alberta do not do it. But Barry said that this does potentially stunt development in the sense that developers have to have deep pockets and put the upfront costs without any guarantee to the people who want to do the long-term leases. So I know I've said a lot there, but if we can get a comment on the risk differentiation between at the DA and the development permit stage, that would bring some clarity on why we would potentially not do this.
Sure. So, Mr. Mayor, perhaps I can speak to 2 points, or 2 points that you raised. The first one is on the risk to the municipality. Yes, we can defer to the time of development permit. However, if that property sells, then we're trying to deal with a new developer, and the obligations, may not. I've been in situations, practical situations, where the developer has sold the property to the prospective new owner. And of course, then he is not unwilling to. And of course, even though it says that the development agreement passes on to future owners, the future owner is not prepared to service that property. And then subsequently ends up in a lawsuit between the previous owner, the new prospective owner, and the town in order to try and get the property serviced in the first place. That example I gave in the report is the fact that we in fact had this where we had a development agreement. The developer was to have serviced the property, didn't service it completely the way it was supposed to. Now we don't have an investment ready property. The development agreement has lapsed, is no longer valid. And as a result, we now have a stranded asset, if you like, a piece of property that somebody coming in wanted to buy it, but as soon as they found out that there was servicing due on it, they were not prepared to do that. One of the realities is that most people that are coming in to build a business on it are not developers per se. They expect to come in and develop on a service parcel. So in economic development terms, when we talk about development ready, we talk about having service parcels available so that people can purchase those properties and build, knowing that all of the engineering, all of the servicing has been done to their satisfaction so that they don't have to deal with that. So in terms of the second point, in the case of Brooks, my experience in working directly with developers is that they want certainty. And certainty comes from the fact that if it isn't serviced, it becomes another hurdle. It becomes another hurdle for them to say, you know what, I can go down the street and I can get a parcel that's fully serviced for the same price. Why would I buy that lot that isn't serviced for the same amount of money? So that's in a practical sense, working directly with developers, that's what they're looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Van. I only have one follow-up and then I'll go to Councillor Hawes. You had mentioned it becomes no longer valid, but those are conditions that we can put in a development agreement to not have an expiration on the caveat to do servicing before the development permit, correct?
Well, in this particular case, the development agreement that we had registered on the title had expired, right? There was a certain sunset clause in the development agreement. And it happened to be more than, let's say 10 years since it was developed. And as a result, we no longer, and it's sold to a third party. And of course, our obligations now go chasing after the original developer who was supposed to have serviced it, and trying to find the new owner and try and get him to service it, and he's not prepared to service it. Well, it really becomes more complex and more difficult for development. We want development to be easy in our community. We want it to be straightforward. We want it to be clean, and we want to be able to promote our community as development ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vanna. I have Councillor Hawes and Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you bear with me for a moment, it's not necessarily totally a question right off the bat, but just to get a sense of timeline and understanding of this process with this particular request. So back in 2019, there was the site plan for this 467 Greg Avenue. That then triggered the pre-application meeting. That was when the developer expressed interest about the commercial and residential use. At that time, there was no combination of the two, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Correct. So in March, and then in March of 3rd of 2020, we then, ultimately, and probably not just because of this request, but it looked as an opportunity to pass the second and third readings so that there could be a mixture of commercial and residential in the same. So this developer, so ultimately, this bylaw amendment helped this particular situation for that person and probably others as well. So that happened. And then, back in February of 6th of 2020, was then the amendment, or was the development agreement was then established, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So once subdivision was approved, one of the conditions on the subdivision application or the approval was that he enter into a development agreement.
Okay. And knowing that the developer knew with that development agreement, the stipulations that the servicing had to be done, so ultimately entered into an agreement with the town of Hinton that was then needed to be done, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And then from what I understand is that person had 21 days, the developer, to appeal if he or she was not, anyone in that case would be able to appeal that portion of it if they chose to, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But we didn't receive this letter until July 14th, so it exceeded the 21 days that the developer knew that was required if they wanted to appeal it, which they agreed to it in the beginning, but then could have appealed it. But then we got a letter on July 14th. Now, my curiosity, just like that letter we got, would that be an appeal? If we would have received it in 21 days, would that be the appeal process?
What he would have been appealing was, he would have appealed the development agreement and the items that would typically be in the development agreement. So he would have been asking the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board to vary it or to change what the condition was.
Change the conditions. But again, that development agreement is an agreement between the town and this developer, which knew the agreement, what was entailed in the agreement then that servicing would need to be provided.
Right, so the development agreement is different from the subdivision application.
Okay.
The subdivision application came first, then came the development agreement. The specific details are in the development agreement regarding servicing, legal obligations, securities, registration on title, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
The one thing to mention is that under the subdivision application, the applicant has 2 years in which to meet the conditions and register the subdivision.
Okay.
So that's in terms of buying time on the developer's part. He has that ability. The subdivision agreement or the subdivision approval is good for 1 year, and he has 1 year, then he can extend the date should he wish to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. So if I may, I mean, whether or not, and this is to Mayor Michaels in his comments about the development agreement, whether or not that is a something I feel that if we as a council wanted to have a further discussion on it, but as per what our policy, is detailed now, steps have been followed. The developer had an opportunity to further discuss and appeal that, chose not to, and now is coming to us later and saying, now I want to change it. And so I struggle with that, that we make this one exception, because then we're going to have many exceptions. So if we want to have that conversation about development agreements and the process, then that's going back into the land use bylaw and having those discussions. But as it states, we're following the directions. It's the developer who's now changing the direction. And, I just personally don't feel as a counselor that that's acceptable to other developers as well. So thank you for that.
I'd like to comment on that. There's nothing in our MDP that precludes us from being able to do this. It says on page 17 of the introduction part that it is typically asked at the development agreement stage. There's nothing that mandates it to do, so it would be totally legal. Like I say, other communities do it. So it's, I don't believe it's unacceptable. It's a choice of council. Do we want to move forward? And I personally wouldn't support a one-off, but I would support a one-off with changing our MDP to allow the discretion to be used, whether it's from council or administration, explicitly saying that they can be done at the development permit stages with whatever caveats. So I think that, at least for me, I want to express my intention with this is to change the policy. This does not help development, and I have yet to hear the true risk of delaying it to the development permit stage because that is tied to the land title. This is very important that the development agreement is going to only be issued and put onto the land title, so that any purchaser obviously is going to look at the land title and see the caveats on it, whether it's the McMillan lands and the caveats that are put on there. This, any owner it's almost buyer beware, but it's on the title. So to me, I see no risk other than when you buy, you should look at the title to see what the caveats are. So just a clarification that there is within our MDP the ability to do so. So I don't want the conversation to say, or to be geared towards, we cannot do this. We can, it's just a choice. We could choose not to, or we could choose to do it, but we have both options. CEO Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I just wish to clarify a little bit of some speculation, I guess, about how this has gone over the last couple of months. This was administration working with the developer over a number of months. He was upfront with his intentions. We knew what he was requesting. We were able to meet some of his requests by providing some good customer service through the planning and development division. This alone was something that we weren't prepared to make a one-off decision on, given that it's municipal best practice as far as we've known, and it meets our development agreement templates and our MDP, and that we were comfortable working within that. The request to work outside of those guidelines wasn't something that we were prepared to make a decision on without coming to council for some guidance. But the working with the developer over the last few months has taken longer than we've anticipated, but it was because we were trying to find some solutions to the issues that were being brought forward, and that we were able to meet some of those requests on our own. So just wanted to clarify that.
Councillor Race and Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. After listening to Councillor Hawes, after listening to you and to CEO Olson, I would like to continue this discussion and not make a final decision tonight. So that's kind of
Councillor Race, Councillor Hawes.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Mayor Michaels. And I agree with you. I think if we're going to have that conversation, I guess my fear is when you said we can make that decision on this one, but then if I'm making that decision on the possibility that we might be changing it for others, but then that's a will of council. So to make this decision, particularly tonight, with the possibility of, in the future, changing the bylaw, I'm not comfortable with that personally. Because if we don't, then it is a one-off. We've made exceptions for this one thing and may not for the future as well. So I guess my main concern is as CEO Olson said, we've been working with the developer, and it's this one thing. But I mean, this is one thing that's a big thing, obviously, that the developer was aware of. That it's not something that caught him off guard or caught this developer off guard. It's a subdivision. It was in the pre-application, so went into it with eyes wide open, and now wants to change how we're going to do business. And I guess that's where I struggle with it. Until we change it for all, if that's the way the will of council, then that's when it happens. Right now, it is what it is. It's in my opinion, whatever the NDP says, but we followed, the process in which, and I don't feel comfortable personally changing it for this one thing on the chance it could change for others. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think on a fresh new greenfield development where they're applying for subdivision and there's all the conditions that they have to meet, it's completely understandable to me that they would have to fully put in all the services, all the streets, all the sidewalks, all the street lights, power, utilities, including all the tie-ins for everything. This to me is a little bit of a unique situation. This isn't a new subdivision development. This to me is more of an infill. And I'm not sure, I don't have the research, and I don't know if administration can speak to it on what the standard practice is for communities that have tried to embrace and promote infill developments in their communities, where they take a large residential or commercial lot, split it in half, and have two separate titles with separate properties on them, whether that happens at the subdivision stage or if that happens at the building permit stage. Because this to me is more like that type of scenario than it is to a brand new subdivision development scenario. So I'd be more inclined to give a little bit of leeway on this when considering that it's a little bit different. I think there are some tools at our disposal to be able to put something on title to make the purchaser completely aware that this is an undeveloped property and that development of the property is the responsibility of the purchaser, so that they're aware up front that when they're buying the land, they know that they have to do the subdivision development requirements along with their construction of their project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm very much of the same opinion as both Councillor Ostashik and the Mayor. I think this is a little bit different. I think in working with administration, there's got to be a way that we can make all parties, potentially future ones as well, aware of some of the potential financial impacts. I would like the opportunity to explore that, because I don't think the request from the developer is out of line. In looking at the letter as part of our agenda package on page 77 of 80, to council, I'd like to request the securities and servicing of the newly created lot can be deferred. This would allow me to have less upfront costs and also less construction costs. I would prefer to have a site plan along with a building plan in order to correctly size and place the site services on the property. At the end of the day, I'm not a specialist when it comes to site development, but from a common sense perspective, if I'm an outsider Joe on the street and you say to me, hey, look, I'd like to defer those costs until I have a more concrete plan of what it's going to look like, that makes sense. So I'd like to see if there's a third way. I'd like to turn this around and see what we can do as a council in working with administration to try and facilitate this. And if there is a bit of risk, I think we can go into that eyes wide open and use this as a test case, because as the mayor had mentioned, cities like Brooks do have a different way of doing things in order to help promote business. And I think that's one of the roles that this council has to play. Thank you.
Councillor Magoon. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess a question for admin. How many of these infill lot situations do we currently have in Hinton? Just a ballpark.
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So when you're referring to infill lots in this situation, are you speaking of unserviced?
Yeah,
lots?
because there's been reference by administration that there's other similar situations where there's been issues with pushing things down the road a little bit.
I'll look to Mr. Vanna. I don't have that information.
Mr. Vanna?
Mr. Mayor, I'm aware of a couple of cases in town that are not serviced properly. We've got other lots that are serviced but not developed on along the highway. In terms of infill like this particular example, I mean, this is the only one I can think of at the moment. I mean, what I would say is that you know, if you wanted to create certainty, and if you wanted to, you know, have ensure that you are investment ready, I mean, the town could actually service the lot itself. To respond to the, you know, developer's letter, we would put the service right in the middle of the lot. It's not a very big lot. You would it's not like you're going to put the service off to one side or the other side. We service the lots right to the middle and right to the property line. And then from that point, the developer, you know, the person who's building on the lot would extend the service to wherever he's going to build his building. You know, and that's typically how it works. So in terms of that, in terms of incurring a large cost, you know, the servicing of this particular parcel is not a lot. I mean, it's in the $40,000 range. So it's not like we're talking about millions of dollars to service something, or even $100,000 to service something. If the town truly wanted to promote itself in helping a developer out, then what we would do is we would assume that infill service cost and then put it on title to ensure that whoever develops on this lot will pay the town back in terms of that servicing cost.
Thank you, Mr. Vanna. Councillor Waugh?
Yeah, the reason I asked is because I am hesitant to do a one-off. I would welcome a conversation to address this on a policy level to see what the pros and cons are, but I'm hesitant to do a one-off, and I just wanted to get an idea how many other, you know, potential, you know, letters we might be getting if we set a precedent here by just making an exception in one case. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Sort of one of my stronger points of why I support this is this does not preclude the ability for a developer to service lots if it's so much better to be prepared and sell, right? Conceptually, if you want to service a lot and that's better and easier to sell, allowing this as a standard protocol or one-off or a combination of the both does not preclude any investor to do that if it's better. But this gives options. So I think what we're saying around the table, there are a lot of great ways to facilitate developers, investors. There's all types of people with all kinds of different amount of money. $41,000 is a lot. I can't afford $41,000. I know developers who their money are tied. So it doesn't have to be in the millions. Hinton hasn't changed from 10,000 people for very long. And there's an ability or a way to keep current practices and add new avenues in order to spur development. So that's why I strongly believe it. Now I think it's the appetite of council. Do we want to look at changing this first? I'm comfortable making a one-off tied to bringing a draft amendment to a future standing committee together. And the reason I support that is nothing precludes us. We are not in contravention of the MGA or anything to do this. Administration technically has the ability to approve this on their own, but they wanted the input of council. So I want to decipher the two very distinct factors that council is allowed, or administration is actually allowed to approve this if they wanted to, and they would not be in contravention of anything. It's just that they're not, they feel that there's a higher risk and there's things associated to it, and bring it to council for our decision. So that's why I'm okay with it. It is legal. So I'll take a first shot at it if I can ask the Deputy Mayor Race to take over my chairing duties.
Sure.
And Miss Olson, or sorry, Miss Anderson, it'll be option 3, and I will add to it.
Okay.
Let's start there. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. And so after stage, there'll be no period. And bring back draft amendments of our municipal development plan that reflect this practice.
Just 1 second, please.
To a future standing committee meeting or decision. And if I can speak to it, Madam Chair.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I feel without the second part, I would still support this one-off. It's clearly stated that we have the ability to do so. In our MDP, it says it's typically done, not always, it's not mandated. So these are, I appreciate that administration didn't want to necessarily make all those decisions. It came to us, which is the people who represent our people in our community, to make this decision that we are allowed to make. But tying these together demonstrates that we are looking at facilitating and making our MDP even stronger in order to push development. So I can stand by the one-off, and it tells every developer, every investor in our community that we are looking at changing this, and we combine it with exercising our right to do this one-off on an infill lot that could, to me, create no other risk but a potential path forward that's much easier for the developer to develop something. So that is my motion. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Nelson and then Councillor Stashik.
I'd like to move to split, please. Just where the and falls, I guess. I guess if I could speak to it, I think from the last couple months of different meetings, when we're talking about amending policies and bringing back new policies, we're looking at early 2021 for anything of substance. We have a lot of different policies and bylaws in the hopper. I'll happily support the first part of it, which is the part about amending it. But the second part, looking at developing policy a year from now on something that we need to, I'm sure the developer is not looking forward to waiting until we have policies developed. So we can split it, and then if the policy discussion goes to a reasonable timeline and it makes sense, then I may or may not support that one. Thank you.
Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fine with splitting it, and I'll speak to the first part of it and then get back in queue when we get to the second part. So leading off of what Mayor Michaels said, we've been for a long time trying to promote growth in the community and development in the community. And while I certainly wouldn't be in favor of doing this for a new subdivision development, I think for an infill type development, as long as there's clarity in there and the town's protected, and it's transparent that there's development costs for the purchaser that they're going to have to pay when they do their building, that there's some utility tie-in costs they're going to have to cover as well. I'm okay with that. I think it gets land available that's pretty easily and readily developable. We're not talking about a whole subdivision development. We're talking about $41,000 worth of utility tie-ins on a $1 million, $2 million project. So I think it's okay, and I think there's mechanisms in place where the town can be protected by going this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Vanna.
Thank you. Just a point of, clarity, and technicality, in terms of the motion. The first part of the motion is fine if council desires to provide it and defer it to the stage of development permit. Council can do. In terms of the reference to the municipal development plan, typically our policies in the municipal development plan are not as specific as that. Typically, where we would do this is we would either bring a policy forward to council to talk about infill development and how we want to proceed with infill development, or we would look into our engineering servicing standards to say how would we deal with service connections on infill lots.
Thank you, sir. I'm up next. Here is my question. When he entered into that conditional subdivision discussion, was he aware that there could be $41,000 costs involved in putting that infrastructure in?
I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll look to Mr. Vanna to.
The simple answer is yes. At the initial meeting that we had with him, even before he made the application, he had discussions with our public works staff, and they gave him a number that was, within $1,000 of the number that we came up with through engineering.
So in
we knew that before we
February,
made the application.
so in February, he was aware of this $41,000 of infrastructure costs on that lot 1B. And you had no inkling, because no appeal was done, that that would be an issue coming up.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, sir. Oh, sorry, sir. Councillor Hawes.
Wendy, if you don't mind, could I see the first motion? Because I need to see the wording of it, please, to,
The one that's made.
yeah. So, my question, I guess, to administration is, because I struggle with this one, but when Councillor Sashik mentioned about how, there's going to be hopefully potentially things in place that protects the town and things like that. So if we pass this motion, that is something that we would see ahead of time as council to make sure that that there are things in place that protects us from any of the risks and things like that we may potentially have that we're protected, I guess, is what my question is. Because I struggle with, if we do this motion, if I were to, be in agreement with this motion, knowing that we're protected, when would we know that? When would we see those protection things put in place? When would we see them, I guess?
Mr. Vanna.
Sorry.
To answer the question, what happened, the process from here, what happened, the council made the motion number 3, to defer it to the development permit stage. Then the process from here would be that we would amend the development agreement, get that executed, and ensure that it gets registered on the title at the time that he registers the subdivision. So that would just deal with this one particular one-off circumstance. So in terms of what we would want to see is, if council wants to make that a direction to look into for other infill lots, then we would ask for a second motion that kind of would ask administration to investigate how infill properties can be serviced.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I'm the only one who's having an issue with the audio, but I hardly could hear what he said at all. If anybody would like to repeat what he said. Councillor Nelson. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor. Mr. Vanna, are you able to kind of sum up what you just said a little louder?
Sure, if you want, I can come down there and talk and say it in person if you like.
I can't make a decision on something that I can't hear. If I can't hear what they're saying, I certainly can't add that to my information.
Is it all right in terms of volume, or I'll come down, I'll be right down.
Josh just messaged that it's his connection.
I'm sorry?
Josh just messaged that it's Peter's connection.
Oh, okay.
We have
Councillor
to-
McGowan.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Yeah, there are very few times that council can have a real direct impact on development. We're very limited. I know when we talk to people in the community and they ask us, well, what's council doing to promote this or to develop this kind of business? We all know that we've got those questions, and that the reality of it is that there's, on the whole, not much we can do outside of policy. This is one of those times where, as the mayor's pointed out, we actually have the ability to make a legislative decision at a potentially fairly low risk with a developer who's done business in our community for a very long time. So as far as I'm concerned, as an individual councillor working in this particular context, I'm very happy to support this motion. I think it gives us the initial footing to see how it goes with, overall very low risk. And that in itself is a demonstration to the community that we're doing what we can to create infill and to develop businesses and, really try to create some economic opportunity in the town. So this is one of those times where I think we can do something and we should. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Sir, Mr. Bana.
I don't remember what you said. So really in terms of the process from here would be that if council approves number 3, deferring it to a development permit, then we would go back and amend the development agreement, have the development agreement executed, and it would be put on title when he registers his lot. And so that's what we would have to monitor and ensure that internally we have that mechanism to ensure that we're going to collect that money at the time of development permit.
Councillor Wah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask Mr. Vanna to follow up the second part of what you had mentioned on the screen that went a little spotty with regards to if we wanted to address this on a larger scale with infill, what would the process look like?
So
Sorry, could I, we have that, like we're dealing with that on the next split part of the motion. So it's, we keep going down to the second split part of the motion. So as long as we're saying on this one, I'm happy with it, but I just want to caution how far we go into the split motion, which is the reason I split it in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
I just
So we'll
wanted
talk
to
just with the
reiterate.
initial motion and then.
sorry, my only comment on the motion probably should be split because we're dealing with 2 different things. One is a policy issue and one's a clause in an agreement.
And what you're saying is we would be working towards establishing a good working relationship with this developer going down that road.
Well, I think it's a general policy for anyone that wishes to have infill development. Like how are we going to do service connections? So there's one thing about, is it a service connection or is it a whole redevelopment? Right? Because there's different scales, right? And so coming up with a policy that deals with service connections for infill lots is probably an easier task to deal with from a policy perspective than dealing with all redevelopment and how we deal with all redevelopment. So, but in any way, that's what we would want to see from council is some kind of direction in terms of what council would want to see in terms of bringing back a policy. So that direction.
All right, thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor. Any more discussion from council? Wendy, could we see that motion when you're ready? So that council direct administration to amend the development agreement to defer the obligations for security and installation of the service connections to lot 1B to the development permit stage. And all those in favor? And it's carried. No, I'm sorry. And those opposed? Councillor House. So the second part of our motion is to, yes, sir, Councillor, sorry, Mr.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Madam Chair. In hearing what Council is talking about in the fact that infill plays a big role in this, I'd like to withdraw this motion and have a discussion with Council on, without wasting time, on what the proper direction as a whole would be to deal with infill and the specifics on the scale spoken to. So I'd like for Council to accept my motion to withdraw.
Any opposition to removing that motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't necessarily have a problem with withdrawing the motion, but I'm not sure that it's necessary to withdraw it either. The administration's spoken to some, maybe a different way to phrase the motion so that it more accurately captures the intent. And maybe that's a good starting place to go from, to develop a motion that does capture the intent. I'm okay with withdrawing it too, as long as there's something else that's relevant that goes back up, because I do want the opportunity to discuss this further.
Yes, sir, Mr. Vanna.
So just for clarification, my point that you may have not heard was that reference to the municipal development plan is typically where we would not make that kind of a policy change. You would make it either as a council directive or a council policy with a directive, or you make it some other mechanism to deal with that. It's more of a specific type of an item.
And so two things are happening here. The mayor has asked that this second part of the motion is removed. Councillor Astashik has no opposition for it being removed, but he does want something put in its place. So how do I handle that? Yes, sir.
So after hearing what Mr. Vanna said, it feels a little bit further, considering I used the MDP in there. So I'd like to stand with my motion to withdraw.
You want to stay with your motion to withdraw this? You want it removed?
Correct.
Do we have any opposition to that, removing it? Yes, sir.
Sure, I speak to it. We had kind of some slight opposition, so I think it's probably just simplest to quickly vote on it.
Okay. Do we need anything up on the screen, or just, or can I just say it out loud? Is there any opposition to removing the split motion, the second portion? All those in favor of removing? Those who wanted to stay?
The motion to it.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just a motion to withdraw.
Okay. Should we see it on the screen or not? Doesn't have to be. So we do have a motion to withdraw. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried.
And with that, thank you, Madam Chair. And administration, based on the conversation, I think and there's some appetite to get some form of wording in order to see what those next steps would be. Any comments or help regarding that, CEO Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Direction from council to bring back an infill policy to deal with service connections and something to that effect. Is there anything else, Mr. Manager?
I think that, I believe it's specific to what council's trying to deal with.
Wendy, Ms. Anderson, any chance you got a little bit of what Ms. Olson said there? Council Direct Administration to bring back an infill policy.
Is infill enough, I guess?
I think that's broad enough.
So are we good with infill or infill development? Ms. Olson. Okay, infill development. And obviously no motion is made, but is there an appetite from someone from council? Councilor Waugh?
Yeah, I'll happily make that motion that council direct administration to bring back an infill development policy to a standing committee meeting. For me, I'm always uncomfortable being the exception. Or deciding on an exception. I'd rather see us deal with this on a broader scale. So I look forward to administration bringing back something for us to chew on for infill, because infill is definitely an issue in our community, and if we can address that, I think that will go a long way.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll have Councillor Nelson, then Ostashik, and Councillor Haas. Councillor Nelson.
What is a realistic timeline for a policy like this to come forward to council?
Councillor Olsen.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I'm honestly not sure what a timeframe would be. As you had stated earlier, there are a number in the queue. As far as policies that are related to this area, development services, I'm not sure what their plan is for bringing things forward or what is in the queue ahead of that. Mr. Gavin, if you have any sense of that, otherwise we would have to maybe return to council with an answer.
My sense of it is a 2021 timeline. I mean, to the end of this year is.
Follow up, sure. Because that does completely affect how I will vote on this. I think this is a big picture thing and something that, because one thing came in front of us right now, we're looking at. But to me, if we're talking about encouraging infill development, that's a strategic planning update concept more for me. So if this policy could come back before strategic planning update, then fine. But I think this could be a really good conversation to fit within the more broad priority levels that we have. You know, this is the first thing of its kind that's come in front of us in 3 years. So to me, there's more pressing policies to bring forward. If something like this came again and it came back to us, we'd have a better understanding and have a 20-minute conversation about it and be on to the next one. So I won't be speaking in favor of it, just because if it's going to be 2021, I'd rather deal with it during strat planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Ostashik.
Other thoughts rolling in my head now, but anyway, yeah, this is something that I'm certainly looking forward to having a discussion about and perhaps creating some policy around. We've been struggling for a long time with trying to generate growth and development in the community, and the reality just is that a lot of our existing vacant commercial properties have been existing for a long time, and we're just in a different development climate now than we were when those properties were originally developed. The development costs were a lot cheaper, building costs were a lot cheaper. Now developers, builders are looking for, to compress facilities onto a smaller piece of property to help lower their development costs or building costs. So I think it's feasible that if we can come up with a way to have a policy that allows a lot of those existing commercial lots to be, perhaps split in half, separately titled, and have two smaller, denser developments on them. It's beneficial for potential developers, builders, it's beneficial for the town, and it helps promote the growth. So I do want to see this. I'm happy to have a discussion about it at strat planning, but I think this already supports our current strategic plan and may need some focusing to bring some more direction to it. But I think with having this on as a policy to come back to us even in 2021 is fine, because as long as it's on the schedule to come back to us, we can still talk about it at strat planning in the fall, and then that will help to flavor what comes back to us when it comes back, hopefully in early 2021, so we can create some policy around this and maybe get some additional action happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Before I go to Councillor Haas, there's many comments regarding the timeline. Do we as a council want, I know Councillor Waugh made this motion, to set a timeline. I'm more than in favor of setting, let's say a March 31st timeline, April 30th, something of that nature, to make sure that it comes within our council term, because it has been a long 3 years of development. And I do support the fact that we're talking about this at strat, but I don't see a problem that this doesn't really hurt by having something on the books. So just throwing it out there, if there's anyone who wants to make that direction to add a timeline. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I too, I think this is a great opportunity. I may not have, been in support of the last motion, but I do appreciate that Mr. Hall brought forward, this conversation, because I think it is important to have it, as Councillor Stashik said, the atmosphere of development has changed drastically since this first was put together. I'd be interested, I want to see this come back because as Mayor Michaels alluded to, is the city of Brooks has changed their look at this and develop agreements and these securities, and it's not a common practice. Obviously, it's one community. So, to see what Brooks has done with this and everything, potentially, maybe they're onto something. I'm great with that. So I think, regardless of when it comes to us, I think it's a really important conversation to have in our community, to have a better understanding of that. So as for a timeline, I agree with Councillor Nelson that this is great for strat planning, but I think sometimes things fall out of that. And, if we can have that conversation sooner and change that policy and get moving on it sooner, because our strat plan is to promote development and to bring businesses into our community and increase the population and all those things, so it falls into play with those as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Waugh, would you entertain a friendly amendment to add a date
For a timeline?
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
I'll suggest by the end of first quarter 2021.
I am.
Councillor Waugh and Council, we have a change to the motion. If Wendy, if it's okay if we can see it one more time so we can, thank you. Okay, Council, we have an updated motion. Any further discussion, questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question that Council Direct Administration,
sorry.
to bring back an infield development policy to a standing committee meeting by March 31st, 2021. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? That was carried 6-1.
Who was the
Councillor Nelson.
Me.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, anything further for this action item for this evening? And seeing none, I do want to thank Council and Administration for this, what I feel is a very good discussion and hopefully a good path forward in finally rectifying some of our developmental challenges in the past 20 years in growing our community. And I think this is one step in the right direction. And with that, that'll bring us to our information items for this evening. Council, any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Hawes.
I do have a quick question, and I apologize for not asking this in another form, but in Council Information Package number 1, there's a letter from Cold Lake Criminal Code Amendment. Now, my apologies if I missed it, but I went through all my packages, or all those packages, and I couldn't find it. Did anybody else see that?
Ms. Anderson?
I'm not on my system
Okay.
here. I can definitely resend
Sorry,
it.
Seal Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. It's page 2 of 14.
Of Council Information 1?
Yes. I have it in my package here.
Okay.
Michelle, could I request a quick recess?
Yeah, we're going to need one anyways. Council, let's give administration time for that, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes.
I've got it here.
Do you? Okay, because I'm looking at package 1.
Pass.
It's a visitor pass.
Yeah.
We're going live here, so.
Okay.
Josh will just let us know.
Hello, Council, everyone. I'd like to reconvene at 5:46, and with that, I'll hand it back to administration regarding the information item question. Seal Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'll turn it back to Councillor Hawes. During the break, we'll be able to provide you.
I got it.
You
Thank
have
you.
it? Okay. Any
appreciate
further questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Thank you, Seal Olson, Councillor Hawes. Council, any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Stashik.
I'd like to move that council accept council information packages number 1, number 2, and number 3 for August 18th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously, and that will bring us to a reporting. And I will start with Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, for anybody who's either tuned in or came to the meeting at different times, I'd like to apologize for not being there in person. My wife's just got out of neurosurgery, had it yesterday. And so we're, of course, at the University Hospital doing the recovery thing. So I apologize and beg your indulgence there. Honestly, in terms of reporting, the biggest thing is I've just been going out to the community. And of course, I know a number of us are well aware of the feedback we've received so far on the potential for having a temporary mandatory mask bylaw. And I did just want to take a moment to stress a couple of points that a large number of people have misunderstood. And the first is that it's important for councillors to approach any potential decision with an open mind. That's part of the MGA. And for myself, I don't have a position on this yet. The most important thing for me is having the open conversation both with council and our community to receive input. And part of that process has been interfacing with our physicians in our community. Council, you've already received a copy of a group letter sent out by a large number of Hinton physicians, but of course, I don't think the buck stops there. There's a lot of community involvement and professional advice to seek so that we can decide if something like that is necessary or if something like that might be necessary down the road. I know both Edson and Jasper have engaged in similar conversations. And so I would like to express my appreciation to the Agenda Setting Committee for putting that on the standing committee of the 25th, because I do think this is one of those issues where rather than running into a decision, it's best that we try to do some information gathering and discuss this as a council. And so that's where those good conversations are going to happen. And also just as important that we are getting feedback from outside sources and our citizens. So yeah, I thank everybody for their help thus far and look forward to that discussion next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maguna. I'm going to go counterclockwise and start with go second with Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In July, I attended our first ASH session in many, many months. It was a very productive meeting, very good meeting. I have been in numerous discussions with people regarding masks, people who are for them, people who are against them, people who need or want a better understanding of what mandatory means for them and their businesses. So that's where most of my conversations have been. I'm hoping it's very appropriate right now for me to say to our fire chief, Mr. Martins, I am absolutely thrilled every time I drive by the fire hall and see that beautiful building, the landscaping, the pride. It is just the best thing ever. So congratulations to you and your team for taking such good care of your area. Good job. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, really nothing to report. None of my committees have met through the summer, so I haven't had an opportunity. I know the library is not full capacity yet, but they're up and running, and have some accessibility there. But the online programming still continues and will continue. The digital numbers grew greatly, so they're going to continue that throughout the programming, as far as I understand. So that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things since last regular meeting. We had a Beaver Boardwalk Committee meeting. Updates on the water application. No real update. Still waiting on approvals so that we can get going on the maintenance. But just want to remind council and the public that their budget is still available, personnel available, ready to go with that. Just waiting for the approval so we can get on the maintenance and do some needed repairs on the boardwalk. Covered some other things, including future of the committee, potential changes to the committee, what the committee might look like in the future, and engagement with the public and other things like that moving forward. But again, unfortunately, not much forward movement as we're still waiting on approvals. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was that I was able to attend the summary sessions for the design charrette for the development of the McMillan lands. That was a very interesting exercise, and wanted to extend my appreciation to administration and the consultant who was working on that for 4 days of incredibly long days and hard work to come up with a potential high-level vision for what that development might look like in the future and what might feasibly look like in the future. Like, they put a lot of work into existing infrastructure and capacity and what the roads can take, what the water and sewer can take, and it's pretty exciting potential development, and look forward to that moving further forward as we go. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we had BBO committee a few weeks ago. In addition, we had a little bit of discussion. There was potential for Hinton to be involved with a ad hoc group put on kind of through the AUMA. So we've been accepted into that. So we will now be a member of the Alberta Water Council ad hoc group focusing on a potential review of wetland policy implementation in Alberta. So it just gives another avenue to learn more and potentially have some political influence if at any point we need that, and maybe help some other communities understand the process a little bit better and understand the implementation better. So the first meeting of that is, I think, on Thursday. So it'll be interesting to see what it actually looks like. And beyond that, we haven't had Community Futures West Yellowhead meetings, largely because they've been just slammed. I think they're over $1.3 million of money they've supported West Yellowhead through business loans, which is just awesome to see. And it's pretty well diversified across the county and all of the participating municipalities. So hats off to the existing staff and the new staff that have been brought on to help support this on a temporary basis. So it's a pretty unreal watching the work that they've been doing to support business in this region. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Wong.
Yeah, thanks. And just further to what Councillor Nelson said, the 1.3 million was federal money that they are, that Community Futures is managing outside their regular portfolio. So it has been a remarkable effort they've had to manage all of those loan applications. And so kudos to Nancy Robbins and the rest of the crew down at that office. Also, I'll echo Councillor Stashik's sentiments. I didn't get to be here Sunday for the unveiling of the charrette, but I was happy to participate for a few hours on the Thursday, and it was a pretty interesting process, pretty extensive, and appreciate the time that admin and the contractors put into that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Nothing really to add for the charrette. For the BBO committee, I guess the only other thing to share with the public is there was a handoff from Alberta Environment and Parks. We had one gentleman overlooking the file that's been transferred to someone else, not helping with the delay, so not ideal, but we understand that things happen. So hopefully, as Councillor Stashik alluded to earlier, that we have something in the near future. Premier Kenny made a quick, quiet appearance in the community of Hinton a week or so ago to allocate just over $8 million of investment into the Hinton Training Center. So that was nice for the provincial government to see and visit a world-class facility that we have in our backyard. And obviously some comments were made on the grand expansion that is hopefully in play in the near future. At a price tag of approximately $100 million, although Premier Kenny did not comment or give any position on that. I had a meeting earlier today with CEO Olson, myself, Yellowhead County, Woodlands County, the town of Whitecourt, town of Edson, Minister Madhu and his staff, and MLA Long, regarding a high-level conversation for the assessment review. And there are a lot of questions to be asked. It was a productive conversation in the sense that we've narrowed down, or at least people communicated some of the desires needed in order to make input viable or to make sense. And one was being that we need more information on where these options came from. What is the premise on them? Let's defend the depreciation values of let's say machinery going from a 16-year depreciation, and why not a 30-year, helping industry? But there's no information to defend any of this yet. we will be looking at making decisions on or giving input for the province to make a decision that will have a huge impact financially on Yellowhead County and other counties in Alberta, which affects us at the end of the day. So it was a productive conversation. That information should be coming to all of councils in the counties and in our municipality to have a better understanding for it. And then secondly is to narrow down the focus on, is it option A, B, C, or D, and what solutions can we bring forward after we get the information in order to find the right balance on helping industry in oil and gas, but yet not affecting the revenues that counties specifically may have hardships regarding. So that was a productive conversation, more to come in the near future regarding that. And that's it for myself. CEO Olsen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things tonight. I do want to thank Mr. Hawk for serving as acting CAO over the last week or so. So I could take a short break with my family. Was appreciative to the help and the support that he provided to administration and council during that time. I do want to, there's a couple of things that came out just this afternoon. There is cougars suspected to be in the Happy Creek Trail Network area, as indicated by a fresh kill near the trail known as Halloween. Can't make that up. It has been closed off now by our peace officers while an investigation is completed by Fish and Wildlife. So more to come on that. Please stay out of the area. And then as well, a notice this afternoon that the town's annual cleanup, which was postponed by COVID-19, is now planned for September 8th to 11th. Information will be posted on the website, on Facebook, and in the Hinton Voice leading up to that date. Yard waste and other large household waste items can be placed at your curb during your regular collection date. We do request that a call into infrastructure services, and the number will be in that information to come, should be placed by residents just to let them know if you're participating so they know to stop and to expect that. So that is really it for me. Oh, and as well, I've heard Little Bird told me that Kick It to the Curb would be back the weekend before the cleanup. So Councillor Race, I don't know if you have anything to add. It would be, I think, the 5th and the 6th.
It would be the 5th and 6th. Yes.
So more information to come on that as well. That's it for me.
Thank you, CEO Olsen. My apologies. I did have an Evergreens meeting a few weeks ago regarding the motion that we passed earlier today. So don't need to really elaborate, but it was wearing my Evergreens hat and trying to broker the best deal for both parties. And with that, any administrative inquiries for today? Any notices of motion? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to go in camera with a 2-minute quick break. Councillor Haas.
Make that motion, go on camera.
Thank you. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone.